Welcome everyone to the ISM New Jersey webinar series. I'm Kathy Perna, the Executive Director. I'd like to welcome all of our ISM members and all of our chapter partners and our guests to today's program. Very important topic, as you can see on the screen. We're going to be talking about procurement's impact on the war in Ukraine and Russia and inflation. And our speaker for today is Graham Crawshaw. But first, I'd like to mention, please use the Q&A or the chat function for any questions, because we do like to hear from the audience. And, this is the place to ask your question. So on to the program. Graham is the Services Director for CASME, and he's also talking from the UK today. He has the overall responsibility for the quality of CASME's Global Roundtable and Virtual Events program, with approximately 200 events delivered per year. He is also the leading facilitator and procurement analyst and develops benchmark activities covering a broad range of procurement categories and practices. Prior to joining CASME, Graham spent 20 years working in procurement for the music industry within an operational and marketing environment. At EMI, Graham regularly supported major artists, including the Beatles, which is really exciting, Queen and Pink Floyd, in developing and sourcing the unique packaging requirements, and subsequently worked on the company's first music streaming contract. Graham is a fellow of the Chartered Institute of Procurement and Supply, so CIPS. At this point, I'm going to turn the program over to Graham, and of course, put in your questions for Graham during the program, and then we'll answer them.
Excellent. Well, thank you so much, Kathy, for that introduction. Great to be back. It's I'm trying to think when we did the last presentation, but since then I know I've done some presentations at some of the other ISM chapters. So even though I am the other side of the pond, so to speak, it's great to be with you today. And I must apologize. I've been going down with some sort of illness bug. It isn't COVID. I've done the tests. It's not COVID. Whatever it is, you can't catch it over Zoom, so we're all good there. But I do apologize if I sound a little nasally. That's just not a lot I can do. But I've had the paracetamol. I've got my drinks here, so hopefully we can get through everything today without any challenges. So the focus today, very, very briefly, indulge me a minute and a half just to tell you about CASME and set the scene for the conversation today. And then going to spend some time sharing with you information that we've collected, looking at what procurement is doing now to help manage both inflation and also the Ukraine situation. And that is having a growing impact. So I'm really pleased. Timing is perfect. Great to be here today to share that with you. And Kathy, if I didn't say, we will send you the slides so you could distribute the details, because I try to avoid a death by PowerPoint, so I won't cover every single point you may see on the slide. So you can refer back to it if you've got that interest. And yeah, please use the Q&A. I may not have the answers, probably won't, but I think it's always good with the procurement to just have those conversations and be aware of some of the challenges that you're facing at the moment. So please feel free to use that. And then I can incorporate the points that you mentioned as we go through the presentation. So very briefly about CASME, if you're not familiar with what we do, we are a relatively small company. We're all about different events and networking opportunities for our members on a global basis. And it's from those events that we can produce different insights, different reports, and also do some benchmarking. And it's that which enables me to join you and share some of the information that we've collected from our members. We are global, and I think that's important because maturity of procurement varies depending where you are in the world. But we always look to collect information locally and then sort of combine it together as opposed to the other way around. So really getting a feel for what the differences are in different regions around the world and what procurement is actually doing at this precise moment. At CASME, we cover indirect and then procurement processes, just ensuring that we don't have any anti-competitive conversations. So that's the work that we cover. To set the scene, because what I will be sharing today is coming from the membership and the types of companies that are in that membership. We've got over 200. Some of the logos on the screen, they are typically large organizations that have got procurement teams in different parts of the world. So I stress this because you need to understand the credibility of what I'm sharing with you today and where that source information has come from. But you know, the most unique aspect of what we do is that we do not have any sponsors, suppliers, or consultants impacting anything. And I think with my procurement hat on, that is so important. You want to be able to read or assess some information without there being an ulterior motive from a supplier trying to sell you something. And so every piece of information, all the data points on the slides that I'll be sharing with you has come from procurement teams in those companies. So you could realize that it is information that's very current and also credible. That's enough about the company. Let me get now into the content and start sharing some of the information on inflation. We did some benchmarking last month where we went out to all of our members, and that is globally, and said, look, what is going on in terms of inflation? From the conversations I've had with people, I've had to vary the story that I tell, because I used to say it's the worst inflation for the last 10 years, then increase that to 20 years, then 30 years, and so it keeps going up. And I think now we have got inflation at a level that it's probably higher than most of us have ever needed to deal with. I think that's an important point to set the scene, because you've got procurement professionals that have been used to low levels of inflation that haven't needed to sort of respond to suppliers' requests for price increases in a way that really was concerning inflation. And that's a mindset. It's a very interesting, different approach when you can very quickly be in the situation that the supplier will say, look, we don't want to supply to you. It doesn't make sense to supply. So what we said was, okay, we know that inflation is high. We know what's going on, but what is the detail behind it? What should you be looking out for? Which factors are really going to have an impact? And it was useful to get this from all of our members, and we've put this in a descending order. So these are in the order that people responded to. And I find it interesting just to create awareness of what the challenges are. I think separately, we probably know where we've got some of the challenges, but it's always nice to see what is the sequence, what are the priorities that companies are being challenged with here. And no surprise that commodity prices are top of that list, followed very quickly by the implications of fuel and energy prices. It's interesting, when I gave this a variation of this presentation to some of our members in different parts of the world, and say specifically Australia, it was like a focus on the energy, but not really on many of the other points. And so I think it's interesting to see that there is a time delay impact depending where you are in the world on some of these. It also depends what your business is as to how much you're impacted by some of the commodities or some of the changes going on. We've spoken about the shortage of labor, And you may think, well, hang on, what's that got to do with inflation? But what we are seeing is, again, in many parts of the world, the knock-on effect from the pandemic. We know there's this conversation about the great resignation or the changes in work that people are doing, and that is having a knock-on effect. That also means that there is a shortage of appropriately skilled labor to meet with the increase in demand that so many companies are facing. So that has made number 5 on the list, because it also means the cost of getting that labor to support your contracts is also on the increase, and probably isn't something that you can just ignore. So those are the top 10. If anyone's got any disagreement or any comment around that, put the questions in the chat and we'll pick that up. Interested to see to what extent you do agree or disagree with those. But I say that's come from a lot of procurement professionals putting in their contribution. When you look at some of that same information as a graph, it shows you then the significance of some of these points. The bars that are in dark blue and dark red are those that have been sort of responded to by most people, that are saying that, yeah, this is really the most important factor that is affecting our business. So it's the same list, but just giving you the breakdown of the data. If you want the details, check that out when you have a look. For procurement, we know there is a problem with inflation. What do you do about it? And so we've went through a lot more detail to try and understand what procurement can actually do in this time of high inflation. And so I've got 4 different charts here, which you can see are the commentary, the responses that procurement has provided. And I think it's a really useful checklist. And so if you don't look at anything else, I'd encourage you, take these next 2 slides and sort of almost align them to some of the ways that you're working when you're negotiating and working with your suppliers. Of course, there is no single answer. And I think the very fact that we've got so many different responses just shows the challenges that companies are facing in this area. And one area that I would like to talk about is sort of procurement almost being stuck in the middle. So you've got procurement, you're trying to do what you've been targeted to, and ideally that probably is cost savings, but in an inflationary market, that could be incredibly difficult. So you're stuck there, you're trying to achieve, you've got the supplier making it very clear that there are cost increases in the commodities, in the labor element, different aspects of the contract. And then you've got your CFO trying to put pressure to achieve the cost savings and certainly not accept cost increases. So it's a real test for procurement to actually be that in the center function that is trying to genuinely negotiate a win-win situation. You can't be in a situation that the supplier says, I'm not going to supply to you. And I've heard different stories where certainly within retail that supermarkets, retailers that refuse any increase or try to heavily push back on suppliers are being told, okay, we won't supply you. We'll go to another of our customers. And so you can't just be in that demanding situation. It genuinely is a case of working it out. And what I find fascinating is if you look at all that we as procurement did during the pandemic and look at it now, there is a common theme, and that is relationships. So we've said supplier relationship management gave us the success during the pandemic, and we've got evidence to confirm that. And again, now we're in this inflationary time, you've got evidence that those suppliers are genuinely working with you and you're working with them to achieve a way forward through different supply relationship management programs, those are the companies that are significantly doing better. And they are using some of the techniques. So the green one on the left there, mitigating measures to look at specific contracts. On the right, specific measures relating to strategy. I'm not going to bore you by reading those. I'm hoping that if you've got any questions from those lists, you could just put them in the Q&A box. If we then look at the other two boxes, this time looking at the measures relating to cost and then the measures relating to suppliers. So I'm hoping that is a really valuable checklist that you could use just as part of your work when actually trying to deal with issues around inflation. I've certainly heard from more companies that are trying to link contracts to specific indices, and whether it's paper or board, you can list, you can then link the pulp to, say, the UKID index or any other category or commodity. If you get it linked to an index, then as prices go up, you adjust your prices, but equally as they come down, which inevitably they will do at some point, then again they can be adjusted. But interesting conversations that I've had, and let's look at paper and board. I'm sure that's something that many of you are involved with. Not only do you really need the index for the pulp, the raw material, but you probably also need the index relating to labor costs and energy costs, because we know paperboard is high energy use. And so actually it's not just the pulp that needs to be tracked, but the other cost elements. So I think it's understanding the breakdown of what your costs are and seeing what mechanisms, what indices you can actually use to link that, and so that it can be managed as well as going up, then hopefully coming down. So what I'm hearing from procurement is the detail that you need to go in is becoming more and more important. And I think ultimately that's what we're great at doing. We're great at understanding the cost breakdown, but it just shows you the importance of having that detail to then be able to challenge, because what you're trying to do is avoid a supplier taking advantage. And I've seen situations where that happens. I've seen it on the other side when promoting sales techniques. The companies are saying, well, you can get away with saying prices need to go up, just use inflation. And so getting that detail to not argue back, but to really challenge back is going to put you in a much stronger position than your other customers that may not be doing the same. So hopefully that's given you some thought in terms of the inflation. I want to move on to the Ukraine war, and obviously I'm just outside of London, 80 miles west of London, and it's a bit too close for comfort because it is still Europe and not that far away. And I know the US is also heavily involved with the issues around the Ukraine war. Interestingly, again, in my presentation to Australia procurement professionals, the only impact they were seeing was connected with energy. All the other impacts just didn't seem to have hit home. But I turned it around and said, you know what, then treat this as an early warning mechanism, because there is no way that the impacts that are having significant reaction in Europe and the US, that they will flow through around the world. So it's a question of getting prepared. Procurement did a fantastic job during the pandemic. I'm sure you've heard that. We've seen that. We've got the evidence to show it. Arrangement, stakeholder engagement has never been higher. Engagement with senior management has also never been higher. So procurement has done very well at managing that whole pandemic situation. And I think what I'm now seeing is the lessons that were learned the plans that were put in place have now been rolled out to the Ukraine crisis. This will teach me for talking too much, really. Let me just have a quick drink. So one of the things that we did, and again, this was some benchmarking we did in April, so literally a couple of weeks old by the time we've reported it out. We wanted to know, well, has contingency planning, has the work that you've been doing, has it improved because of what you did in the pandemic? And interesting, 68% of people who responded said, yeah, there's definitely been some improvement. And a further 23% said significant improvement. So procurement has done a great job in the crisis. We've gone from the pandemic, we've gone from the war. What's next? I must admit, we've had those sort of conversations, and my goodness, it doesn't actually bear thinking about. Some would say the one crisis, global crisis we've not seen is a much bigger cybersecurity issue. So actually, I don't know. Where do you draw the line in terms of the preparation and the work that you need to do? I think at the moment, taking on board that collectively you've done a great job, and that contingent planning is now helping at this particular time. One of the questions that's been repeated, certainly across Europe, is those companies that are pulling out of Russia. And that's almost the vast majority. Everyone is subtly concerned, have they got contracts that are dependent on activities taking place in Russia? And it's interesting to see how easy is that question to answer. I'm not sure for yourselves. If someone said to you, what is the impacts of the contracts that you look after? Does your first tier, second tier, third tier supplier have a reliance on goods, services coming from Russia? So I was very keen to understand, given all the technology, given all the requirements of just understanding your supplier base, and that's been the theme also for the last 2 years, that procurement needs to understand more about tier 1 suppliers, but also more about tier 2 suppliers. And it's not easy. So if you are having impacts, how easy is that to find? And I thought, yeah, really nice split here, basically 50-50. So 50% of companies saying, yeah, very easy or quite easy to identify if we've got suppliers with Russian involvement. But the other 50% saying, actually, you know what, it's actually quite difficult or very difficult. So again, rhetorical question, but for you, how easy is it when someone within your business says, this is what you need to identify from your supply base? How easy is it to actually get that information so that you can be very clear? Yes, we do have suppliers that have got engagement with Russia, or we haven't, or these are the suppliers and we're pulling out. We're changing our energy supplier. So very, and that was just an example, by the way, because there've been, certainly in Europe, a lot of companies where gas is supplied directly to different countries by a pipeline network. And so that's been a hard one, probably the hardest one to actually turn off. But interesting to get that level of detail. We then wanted to know generally what is causing concern because of the crisis going on in Ukraine. And again, if you've got that knowledge, it then helps to work it out. So you can see on the screen here, it's actually quite involved. I think that was my surprise when I actually saw the information. There's a lot to it, and it's amazing the knock-on impacts that are likely to take place purely because of what's going on in Ukraine. So shortages, continuity of service, concern of different embargoes, getting what you need is number one. we've spoken about shortage of commodities, and there are some products which I'll probably share with you any second that do come from Ukraine or surrounding countries. And then we've got this whole impact again with energy, what's gone on in the global gas market and the electricity prices that have had just a simple knock-on effect for all, not only businesses, but also for consumers. So let's look at the detail, because we said, okay, which commodities within the supply chain are causing the biggest challenges here? And we're going to divide them up into 3 different areas. So the first one's food. And again, I never knew that Ukraine was so involved in these types of commodities. And sunflower oil, to name one, has already meant there are shortages of other cooking oils, and the prices are then going up. But when it comes to the crops, it's like, well, why is that really an impact? Well, it seems to be that those farmers that would be typically planting the crops are too busy in the war effort. And so it's a knock-on effect. So already now we know the problems aren't now, they're going to be in the future, because the crops aren't being planted that would ordinarily be harvested in the future. So this is why I say the issues may not affect you at the moment, but it's not going to go away anytime soon. So those are the ones in terms of the food. Materials. There seems to be some very specific materials that are predominantly sourced in the Ukraine area. And again, who would have thought it? Who would have thought that there would be such products or minerals like titanium, uranium, that the shortage or the lack of mining is having a global impact on the pricing and availability of these. So to understand them is also very useful. This resin and oil products also seems to be one that's bubbling under the surface that, again, is going to start to become more and more of an issue. So I think for these, it's just, again, awareness of what you're buying. Are they, is it impacted by some of the products that are on the screen? And then finally, other. And again, I found this really interesting, because you think, hang on, wait a minute, is it really having an impact? And when you look at the detail and have those conversations, you realize that, yes, it does. It is starting to be an issue because of this knock-on effect of component availability going into products that then impact the whole supply chain. The impact on professional services, I also thought, was a very interesting one. The reason for that is that you've got people that work either in Ukraine or in the surrounding countries that used to do quite a lot of companies have outsourced to those companies in those countries. And therefore, you've got a knock-on effect on the labor availability, and certainly professional services, some of the IT services. So we are seeing already conversation that it's going to be a challenge, and there could be concerns that, again, people are not, they're just nervous of putting contracts to those locations. And actually, specifically the countries in question are Romania, Slovakia, Poland, and Hungary. Those that go around Ukraine. So we've created a level of nervousness that just means there's that knock-on impact. And so companies that, I mean, we know Poland's quite an area where procurement is outsourced to. So we're not saying it's a problem today, but this is causing great concern, because we also don't know how long this crisis is going to go on for. If you go back a few weeks, the view was that it would be over and done with very quickly. And I'm not going to go into all the politics around it. That's completely inappropriate. But I think you know what I mean when I said it would be over relatively short time. Now the view is this could drag on for months and months, if not multiple years. So therefore, in terms of your contingency planning, it's something that needs to be taken into account. This chart is the responses that we got from people saying, look, we've understood the problems, but what can you do about it? It's all very well having a list of shortages or food products that there's a problem. What can you actually do? So this is what Procurement's responded to us saying they are doing. There is no single answer. I think that's pretty obvious. There's probably a combination of factors that you could do. So again, I see this as a really good checklist just to go through and sort of say, well, do any of these work for us? The hedging is an interesting one. And I think that goes back to needing a conversation with your finance team. Your company is either allowed or not allowed to hedge. It's really interesting to see. Many companies, they just see it more like gambling and just do not allow it whatsoever. However, if you do consider hedging, if your volume of gas or electricity is large enough, then that may make perfect sense for you to do so. Some of the others, consortium buying, again, depending where you are in the world, that can either be a very popular option or one that you would never consider. It is interesting, some of the procurement techniques vary in popularity depending where you are based, and I think so much of that comes down to culture of the organization. I do find it fascinating. I said 10 minutes, 15 minutes ago about relationship management, but the very strong response that saying, you know what, talk to your suppliers, really have an enhanced supplier relationship management program in place covering these commodities contracts where you've got greater level of nervousness, because it's only by having those conversations that you're going to be able to make some progress. I'll say quite a few different suggestions there, some of them probably more obvious than others. Some you may be able to do, others maybe not. It's easy to say, well, let's just build stocks. But then you have problems with warehousing space, not being able to get it, or just the impact of stockpiling may not make financial sense for your organization. I did want to throw in a slide on risk management, because from all the conversations I've had, there is such an overlap between managing inflation, managing the Ukraine crisis, and then overall work on risk. And I'm not sure about you, but my take on risk management as a topic is that procurement is getting more and more involved in a greater number of risks and managing those risks. So the breadth of risks just keeps on expanding. And so we did some benchmarking earlier this year that said, okay, what are you doing procurement under the heading of risk management? Because it can be overfacing. You may not know where to start or where to put your resources on. Now, I can tell you, I've seen a dramatic increase in companies saying, look, we need some systems, tools, investment or resource to help us manage risk. And you know what? It's a great one to justify, because we're not talking about a return on investment calculation. We're putting it to the business to say, we've got concerns over these risks. What can we do about it? There are some solutions and they will need support. And then let the business decide what is its appetite for risk management. But I can tell you a lot of companies are really focusing on tools and the whole digitalization program around risk. And if your company is one that's early on in adopting new technology, then talking about risks, talking about the value you can bring by managing risk is a really easier, well, I won't say easy, an easier route for applying that at the moment. So what we've got on the screen is the same color coding. If you look at the dark blue and the dark red, those are the greatest area of focus that procurement professionals have responded with. You know what, you could probably think of some of these anyway, but no surprising, financial stability with suppliers is right at the top of the list. But when you look at some of the others, you do get a flavor for some of the risks that procurement is now being challenged to look after. And I think this does go, even though we did this separately from our inflation and our Ukraine survey, it does go hand in hand. And I think if you are looking to develop more in terms of risk, to understand your commodities, to understand the impacts of the war and the impacts of inflation, then it's a nice package of work, nice package to really focus and concentrate on. I did like this slide. So we have all been probably involved at some extent or other talking about environmental social governance, sustainability, environmental points. And you know what, I'm slightly cynical. When times are hard, do those objectives go out the window? What are the priorities on the business? When things are good, it's like, yeah, we want to achieve our targets. I know many companies have set targets for sustainability. Fortunately, many of them are quite distant targets that we'll achieve net zero by 2030 or 2040. But I was really fascinated to know if people would be honest and say, what are the priorities here? We've got all the turbulence, the volatility of the markets, but are we putting sustainability to the back seat, or is it still as a priority? And I think people were honest when they responded. 36% saying basically a low impact, so carrying on as planned, but 50% saying, yeah, there's a moderate impact, and 14% saying a high impact. And again, I think when you're trying to juggle everything, there's only so many hours in the day. You've got issues around risk, inflation, shortages, all the things we've been talking about, and yet you've still got your objectives that you're trying to achieve on sustainability. And for me, this is starting to apply a bit of common sense and sort of, you know what, if your sustainability objectives slip a little bit, don't beat yourself up too much. Don't be too concerned. I'm sure that will catch up. But I just thought it balanced it nicely, because it shows the effort that procurement has actually got to put in to just keeping everything working. I think overall, we have evidence that procurement did a fantastic job during the pandemic. The way things are going, I think we're equally doing a very good job when it comes to managing inflation, recognizing, as I said, that individuals have had to learn, because you've got a whole generation of procurement professionals that has dealt with low levels of inflation and hasn't known what to negotiate, what to accept, and what to challenge. So I think, yeah, I'm hoping that when we look back on 2022, it will be said that once again, procurement's done a fantastic job at managing the market, managing commodities, managing everything around that whole combination of challenges, which is as a result of high inflation and also the Ukraine crisis. And of course, we hope that the war is resolved before it gets sort of a worse situation, because that doesn't really bear thinking about. I'm going to stop sharing now. I need another drink of coffee, of water, I think this time. Coffee's gone cold. I'm hoping that has been of interest. I really appreciate the fact you've all stayed on. So that's always a good sign. So what I remember, the point I made, that information has come from hundreds of procurement professionals. It's not Graham making it up. It's not any of my colleagues or analysts making it up. It's not an academic exercise. It is what procurement has been saying at the moment. And I think, if nothing else, use it to reflect upon as you're making your decisions and working out whether to actually maybe hold off going to the market because it's too turbulent, working with the suppliers you've got, getting that level of detail about the contracts, and then between you working out what is the best way to move forward. Kathy, I hope that was of interest. My voice held out, which was quite amazing. Yeah, that's. I'm hoping just has given something for people to think about. That's what I always like to do. It's to set that challenge, to just let people step aside from the day-to-day firefighting and work they're doing, and just thinking, yeah, actually, maybe there is something I can do that will help because of some of the things that they've listened to today.
Thank you, Graham. Appreciate that. Actually, it's very, very great. We did have we do have a couple questions coming in. The first one, can you recommend an index to monitor the UK labor rate?
You know, I saw that that question come in from James, and you know, I'm struggling on that. I'm not sure that there is just an easy one to or an index specifically to cover that. I think what I would hear most companies saying that we certainly have got the minimum wage, so that is known. And if anything, it's then watching what wage inflation is looking like. And I can tell you at the moment, that's probably around the if you're public sector, so government is trying to hold it down to under 3%, private sector probably 4 to 6% wage inflation. So I think with any procurement contract that requires a lot of labor, it's just recognizing, is the level of increase reasonable? In the UK, we've also had an additional social security tax that kicked in April, an additional 1.25 percentage points. And so if you've got a labor contract that where there isn't the margin for the supplier just to absorb it, it's inevitable that the social security costs will also need to be passed on and incorporated in any increase. For me, and I've done a lot of temporary labor contracts, it's about managing that margin. And so the margin that the supplier gets, if you do a fixed rate, pence or cents per hour, depending on how you've got it, there's real no reason for that to increase if you are flexing all the variable costs or the pass-through through costs. So I think that's how I would look at anything that was really heavily labor intensive.
Thank you. If anybody has any questions, just put it in the chat or the Q&A and we'll get to it. Another question. How does SRM help mitigate some of the impacts of the war?
I really do think that SRM, so let's just be very clear, supplier relationship management is that activity that you're doing with the supplier whereby you are sharing more information with that supplier, you're being more open and transparent with that supplier, you're then expecting that supplier to work closely with you. And I wanted to say that, apologies if that seems really obvious, but I think we can get too hung up on the buzzwords around. Everyone say, oh yeah, SRM program. What does it actually mean? What are you actually doing as an organization? But I think once you've got that stronger relationship with the supplier that understands what your requirements are, and you've shared details as to what your expectations and needs are for the following year, 6 months, year, then that's where you see the relationship really does work. And it just does seem to, regardless of the situation, having that close contact with the supplier, meaning you're just sharing information and there could be no misunderstanding. I think the companies that don't share what their plans are and treat suppliers at slightly arm's length, there's an interpretation issue. What do they really mean by this? So I think supply relationship management is such a powerful tool, but it does need to be used correctly. It does need investment in time and to get your suppliers on board. But I've certainly seen that whether it is the pandemic, dealing with the concern of shortages, because you want the supplier to say, yeah, they'll supply you. You don't want to make life difficult for the supplier. And just on this subject, payment terms, it's the great one, because it's back to that conflict. You've got procurement in the middle, you've got the finance, say extend working capital, extend the payment terms. But we know that if you listen to the supplier, what can be even more important to them is working capital or liquidity. And so agreeing the payment terms, and if you've got a challenge that you do need to lengthen the payment terms, then introduce supply chain financing or invoice discounting. Make it easier for the supplier to at least have options, so that then you can negotiate and ultimately they get paid when they want to get paid. And you also have not needing to worry that the supplier is going to get frustrated because of the time it does take you to pay. It's very highly controversial, payment terms. I always say, I know that during the pandemic, there was a lot of work done where people did flex their terms depending on the state of the suppliers. And I think the same is valid now in terms of inflation and the war, and sort of really understanding, what does your supplier need and how can you help them? And so it's often one that's overlooked, but not easy, because you have got to negotiate that, and your finance function may not like it if you agree 30 days terms with everyone, or even shorter. But it's a great one to think from the supplier's perspective, not yours. If you get it right, then much more likely they'll want to support you.
Oh, thank you. Thank you. How procurement works with finance on issues of inflationary increases?
Very interesting question, and there is no easy answer to that one. My take on it is all about being transparent. So you've just got to, those areas where costs need to go up, in the same way as I've seen that transparency being important with the supplier, I think you've got to be the same with finance, and recognize that, yeah, labor may be going up. There may be a cost of, well, just transportation. I mean, look at we've still got very high costs of bringing containers in from China, whether it's going to Europe or to the US. That price is very widely reported in terms of the increases. And I think it's a question of being clear with finance that this is just out of your control. But equally, when things then start to soften and hopefully return to a level of normality, then also prices can come down. So I think I can't see another way around it. If you need the products and you don't increase the price, then you're not going to get them. And so finance need to be aware of, yeah, this is the breakdown of why it's gone up. You can do certain things in terms of deciding whether you actually prefer certainty of price versus the flexibility of price. So if you really do want a fixed budget or fixed price for 3 months or 6 months, then you're probably going to be paying more. So it depends what you're trying to achieve. Does your finance want certainty of pricing, or does it want the best cost, the lowest cost? Because suppliers, someone's going to take the risk. I think that's why I wanted to share that risk chart. Someone has got to take the risk, because there is risk. And so does your supplier take it? Do you take it? Do you share it? How do you minimize that? And obviously, if you can have fully variable prices, then there's less of a buffer around the risk that needs to be incorporated into the prices. So I think you need to have that strong conversation with finance to say, what do they actually want? Is it longevity of fixed price, or is there greater flexibility there? And good luck trying to get that on some of the energy deals where, yeah, it's just impossible now to get any sort of fixed pricing.
Definitely. Okay. Another question. Any thoughts on managing suppliers who were allocating product as a result of material and manufacturing shortages? And how do we, as the customer, gain priority?
Great question, Stephen. Thank you. Thank you for that. This whole customer of choice, we hear it as a bit of a buzzword, or you hear it from the consultants, but I strongly believe that you almost just need to think from the supplier's perspective. So I think payment terms is top of that list, because if you are saying, I'm going to pay you in 30 days and we're not going to mess you around, we'll be consistent, then that supplier is probably more willing to want to supply you than someone else. I would still say, Stephen, that it is about the relationship. You've got to have those conversations. Suppliers will know who they want to supply. I think sharing information about the future, the way that you intend to go, perhaps extending the contracts and avoiding going out to the market would help. I think it really does depend how critical this shortage is. But I really do think you've got to think from their point of view rather than your own, and think, well, actually, am I an easy customer to deal with? How easy is it for the supplier to work with me? Do I make it really difficult for them? Or actually, are we their preferred customer because we take the goods in, we don't keep their drivers waiting, we are flexible on deliveries, we're strict in terms of payment, we don't have invoice queries that we've generated. It's all those small things that typically will make a difference to the supplier, and therefore position you as the company that they want to work with.
Thank you. I don't see any other questions. Do you have any closing remarks before we end the program?
I think watch this space. I think that's, if I really did know the answer, I did a podcast yesterday, and the final question to me was, get your crystal ball out and tell us what's going to go on. And I thought, if I'd actually got that answer, I'd have probably be multi-millionaire sat on the beach with a glass of champagne. It's impossible. And it's so often that with hindsight, who would have predicted that we'd have gone straight from a pandemic to a war? And so it's all very well with hindsight. I think procurement's done a great job. I think we'll continue to do it. Speak with your suppliers, work with them, and then I think together, collectively, we'll get through this. This high inflation is not like it was in previous. There is that consumer demand still there. I know interest rates are increasing. They've increased in the US and also in the UK and other countries. But I think everyone's saying this is different. So maybe it won't just continue. Maybe we just need to get it leveled out. And I think as soon as we can sort out energy, gas prices, and fuel prices, that will be a big start, because then we'll have a positive knock-on effect. So I think just really keep up everything that everyone's doing, and fingers crossed we'll get that light at the end of the tunnel. We'll get a little bit brighter, and maybe procurement will have an easier time of it. But thinking about it, when have we ever had it that easy? I think that's the exciting part of working in procurement. There's never a dull moment. There's always something going on, which makes it exciting and challenging. But I guess we would quite like a quiet period at some point.
Definitely. My gosh, I never even thought about it when you were talking. First we had the pandemic, and then we had this. I never even thought, what's next?
I know it's a bit scary thoughts, and I've referred to a cyber attack a few times. I know Bill Gates has also done the same, So not getting paranoid, and I hope I'm completely wrong, but yeah, I think it's that mindset of being prepared for eventualities. I think we're doing collectively a great job on that.
Definitely.
Cassie, thank you for having me on your sort of session, your chapter today. I love talking with you. Connect with me on LinkedIn. I use LinkedIn extensively to share thoughts about what's going on in procurement. So look forward to connecting with people, and I just hope that's been of interest for everyone in your chapter.
Thank you. Well, thank you everybody for joining us. Thank you, Graham, for joining us. I just want to mention to everybody that we're doing another program on, yes, we are doing another one this month. It'll be on Tuesday, May 17th at 2 p.m. Eastern Time, and it's going to be our supply chain information flow. And it's going to be learning how do you talk to IT. So that'll be another interesting discussion. So at this point, I'd like to say thank you. We're going to close out the show, and everybody will get a copy of the recording later today and the slides and continuing education credit for joining us this afternoon. Okay, everybody, have a great day. Thanks, Graham, and feel better.
Thank you. Thank you, I will.